Senator Alex Padilla of California, the first Latino senator to represent the state, gave the Spanish language response to President Trump's State of the Union last night. Senator Padilla focused his remarks on the president's immigration crackdown, criticizing the ICE surges in major American cities. And the senator joins us now. It's great to have you this morning. Thank you so much. I'd love to have you explain for anybody who is wondering the decision to have a Spanish language response, and also after having sort of the night to sort of take it all in, what is your reaction to President Trump's address?
Yeah, President Trump's address, besides being very long, was in many ways exactly what we predicted, right? You just did a lot of fact-checking. His speech was full of lies, with a few misrepresentations added in. He lied about the economy, and I certainly discussed that in my response after last night's State of the Union. He tried to paint this his immigration enforcement laws as a huge success. Everything's going perfect, when we know the reality is far from that. The vast majority of the people who have been detained, who have been arrested, many who have been deported, many without due process, are not the dangerous, violent criminals that he talks about. They're people that, maybe they came legally, overstayed a visa or what have you, maybe undocumented, but don't have criminal convictions on their record. And so there is a direct link between the two. When you start deporting a significant amount of your construction workforce, when you're deporting people who work in agricultural fields or in meat processing plants, et cetera, then the cost of food is going to either continue to be up or go higher. The cost of housing is going to continue to be high or go even higher. So they really are interrelated here.
And Senator, certainly you reflected something that was a major takeaway last night. The president almost seemed to be asserting his own reality, misrepresenting the actual nature of his deportation plan, but also the state of the nation's economy. And these are things, immigration, economy, that were supposed to be his strengths. Talk to us, if you will, about what your constituents are telling you, particularly about the cost of things. You started to touch on it there. Have they felt that their lives are, in fact, better now than they were a year ago? Do they think that there are things they need each and every day, from housing to food, gotten any cheaper?
Absolutely not. And that was one of the through lines, right? My response to the State of the Union in Spanish, Governor Spanberger in English, but the emphasis on costs, cost of living, everyday cost. Everybody's got to pay the bills. Cost of food hasn't come down. I don't just hear from constituents. My wife and I are raising 3 boys of our own, so you name it: eggs, meat, milk, etc. It's a little painful to go to the grocery store these days, and it continues to be the case. We called the president out on his lie about the cost of gasoline when you're pumping at the gas, the cost of electricity. In addition to the cost of health care, your water bills, etc., Americans are feeling the pinch because of Trump's bad, failed economic policies, including but not limited to his unnecessary tariff wars, which we knew he didn't have the power from the outset. And the Supreme Court ruled just this last Friday. But of course, his ego can't handle it. He can't admit when he's wrong. He can't pivot to something smarter. And so he doubles down, and it's American families that continue to pay the price. And one other thing I want to sort of share that I did emphasize in my response, the president's threat to take over our elections. My God, how dangerous is that? First of all, the Constitution is very clear. Congress has a say in the setting of elections, but it's states that administer elections. This is done at the state and local level. But going back to the big lie, the fact that his ego can't handle his 2020 loss, he's trying to make it harder for eligible Americans to register to vote, to stay registered to vote, to cast their ballot. He wants to eliminate vote by mail. And Secretary Noem said the quiet part out loud when she was in Arizona last week. This administration only wants, quote, the right people to vote. Their record is so bad, their only chance of staying in power this November is to rig the November elections, and we're going to stand up to it.
Yeah, one of the very few policy proposals he endorsed was indeed this so-called SAVE Act for that. So, Mara, we'll see if President Trump gets any sort of bump in the polls from this speech. My guess would be minimal, if any. But it's worth underscoring his weakened position as he entered last night. His overall approval rating really quite low, in the mid to upper 30s, but also hemorrhaged gains he had made in November 2024 with black voters,
right,
Latino voters, and independents.
Right. I mean, the group of voters who said maybe we'll take a chance because we're hurting economically on Donald Trump, they have long since been lost by this president. And so then additionally, you have Americans who, Democratic voters who are consistently showing up now in special elections and in kind of lower turnout elections. So this is really making up what looks to be a potentially brutal midterms for the Republicans. But I wanted to ask the senator, you were kicked out of a press conference last year with Secretary Noem for questioning tactics during an ICE raid in Los Angeles. And I just wonder, with Americans, especially brown and black Americans, being terrorized on the streets of American cities, but also the equally large concern about just affordability, how do you think the Democrats should navigate that? And what should the messaging be? How much focus should be on the liberties that we are losing, but also affordability?
Right. No, and I think that's exactly the point. What's happening in communities across the country, it started in Los Angeles last year. We've seen it in Washington, D.C. We've seen it in Portland. We've seen it in Chicago. And we've seen it especially in Minneapolis. People understand how fundamentally wrong it is. The detention, arrests of not just undocumented immigrants, legal immigrants with work permits, United States citizens, even veterans. This administration is out of control. And so we're at this point where, at least in Congress, we're trying to leverage the Department of Homeland Security funding bill for some fundamental reforms to rein in the out-of-control ICE and CBP officers as a step towards the overall modernization of our immigration system, which everybody agrees needs to be done. So we're acting on it. We're not waiting for November to try to make some progress here, because this isn't just about immigration. When you're violating people's First Amendment rights, right? Renee Good and Alex Preddy were shot to death exercising their freedom of speech. When you're violating people's Fourth Amendment rights, when agents are barging into people's homes without a judicial warrant, it is fundamentally wrong, and nothing riles Americans up more than when you try to take away their fundamental freedoms.
That is correct. Democratic Senator Alex Padilla of California, thank you very much for coming on this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Mika.